It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstye Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business empire in all of its Super Wildcard Sunday energy. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing all right, man. How are you doing?
Pretty good. We sit at this weird moment where we record this before let me stress that, Super Wildcard Sunday kicks off, and you'll be listening to it after that smorgasbord of NFL football is completed. 6 Super Wildcard games. So, we sit in this kind of time Netherlands, Steve.
Yeah, it is kind of odd. I don't really like the idea of a Monday night football wildcard game very much. I don't know. To me, I'm old school. I think they all ought to be in the weekend. I would be pretty irritated if I was either there's no way the Eagles are going to win. So I'd be pretty irritated if I were the Bucks because they're going to have to play again. They're going to lose a day compared to some other teams. So I think that's the NFL going one step too far and kind of hurting competition in the name of money. Which kind of flows into our topic, but I don't like that. I think that I'd do 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday.
I'm for anything that clears up Saturday afternoon from me having to argue why I have to watch this football game.
Hey, look, it's only once a year, one time a year. That's it. Tell the family or whoever, your wife or whoever it is, that she can lose you for one day. You'll be fine. The big one for us down here in Houston is the Texans Browns, which is the very first
right
game.
Out of the gate.
Yeah. I actually think after I did a really way too long game preview, which is up on the Hogstye. I mean, not that you guys will need that after we record, but I think that's one of the best games of the weekend, actually, because you got 2 of them which are not good. You got the Cowboys-Packers game, which is not good. Cowboys, I think, are way too good. And then you got the Bills and Steelers. That one's going to be a blowout, too, I think. And so I don't believe in the Eagles either. I mean, until they show them the world that they are like the Eagles of old, meaning week 3, I don't believe it. So I really think of all of those, I think you got really 3 competitive games because those 3 I don't think will be. That's my take on it, including the Texans Browns. And I don't know. I think the Browns may take that one. Just a rookie quarterback, brand new. Organization. I think the moment may be a bit too much for them, the Texans.
I definitely think that game is getting sort of short shrift in terms of excitement. It should not be the first game just from a matchup perspective. However, I do think that the Steelers-Bills is going to be highly watchable because we have an amazing equalizer in what looks to be a pretty monstrous snowstorm. So just from a TV watching perspective, I think that might be like Blizzard Bowl, which is always good television.
Well, you got the other Blizzard Bowl. It's going to be the Kansas City-Miami game. That's the other one.
Yeah, which you have to have. Here's a future casting, and they're never, you have to read between the lines on some of this, but I am curious to see what this Peacock only game does numbers wise, or what the buzz is, or whatever we can glean from what executives are willing to release. But so you better gear up with your trial run of Peacock, NFL fans.
You see, Peacock comes free with Comcast's Xfinity cable service, so I actually have Peacock, so I will be able to watch that game without fear.
I have Peacock too, but I don't get it for free, unfortunately. But yeah, so I'm curious to see. So we'll probably see in our next show what the buzz coming out of the streaming first ever streaming only game is. But as of right now, and in our time lock, it makes no sense.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. We're talking about these games that are literally in the past for every single person that has listening to this. We could be totally wrong. Who knows? It could be 70 and sunny for the Chiefs game, for all we know. Are you going to suffer through a major snowmageddon, Chris, up there?
No, I think we might. I don't know. We might skirt it, but we'll see. That's mostly north and Western New York. But we'll see. We'll see.
It's by Houston, Texas standards, it's going to be as cold as it's ever been before down here. It's going to be in the 20s here, which is unbelievably cold and something that South Texas is not prepared for,
Yeah, we have seen how Texas prepares for ice over the last couple of years.
Well, the problem is, like, fundamentally, you don't do things like invest in salt and snow plows and things, and they would never be used. And so nowhere down here is prepared for Arctic like that, because it's just a waste of money for the most part.
Get those salt trucks out.
They don't own it. There are no salt trucks. That's what I'm telling you. There are no salt trucks. They don't own it.
Fine, you just repurpose a garbage truck.
Oh yeah, that. How about a dude hanging out the back, like throwing salt, with a shovel?
Hey, whatever works. Whatever works. So we're looking at ESPN a little bit, and then of course when we look at ESPN, we're talking about Disney, which has a bunch of new media rights announcements and news, and even some kerfluffles, which we'll also get to. But what we do know, Steve, right now is that the NCAA has kind of put together an omnibus content media package. ESPN has bought it, and that's going to be your home for most NCAA broadcast television, or stream television for that matter.
Yeah. Okay. So this has been in a couple different places, but I'm reading this in Sports Business Journal. They will give you a couple free articles every month if you want to look at this. This is called Inside the NCAA's Media Rights Deal by Ben Portnoy. I assume there's no relation to Dave Portnoy with there, because this guy's a legitimate journalist, and Dave Portnoy is Dave Portnoy. Dated the 8th of January. So what basically happened here is that ESPN has paid the NCAA $920 million for the broadcast rights to the bulk of NCAA championship tournaments / competitions, specifically 40 different championships: women's basketball, volleyball, gymnastics. And so it's, I guess, apparently over 2,300 hours of programming over the scope of 8 years. Sorry, it was an 8-year deal, $115 million annually. And so this is ESPN kind of doubling down on their broadcast rights. They've gotten into this, and they've always been into this a little bit. They've always had some things, like the Tiddlywinks championships, so those type of things have been broadcast sometimes, that kind of stuff. But I think what they're doing here is they're programming all of the other streaming channels. A lot of this stuff is not going to be on ESPN proper. You're not going to get some minor sport on ESPN proper, but all this stuff will be on ESPN 2, ESPN Plus streaming. And so this, to me, is ESPN doubling down and trying to secure their future in kind of a turbulent time for their corporate owner. Thoughts?
I think that what this is, I would probably agree with that. I mean, their strategy has been clear for years, if not a decade plus, in terms of you just get as much of the games, quote unquote, and live content as you can.
Yeah,
and you
anything.
corner that market.
Right.
So I think there's two interesting things at play here. One is that there is obviously a growing audience for at least a measured growth for sports that aren't just men's college football and men's college basketball. So it does say there's the strength of what they call the long tail, which is that if you can find audiences for your content down a long tail, then you can build a pretty big and robust business. So the long tail basically was invented as a way to explain Amazon as a retailer. So that their business was just as much built on niche products that they could provide a pathway for than paper towels. So this is a long tail play for them, in that if you think about how many streaming and broadcast properties that Disney controls, which is Hulu, ESPN, Disney proper, all kinds of stuff, then and they know more what kind of target audiences, target marketing they have in those different streaming paths, then they can match this content to those audiences. And so I think you see something like that. You could see a very clear path between the Disney Princess bundle on Disney leading into a national championship competition for gymnastics. Or something along those lines. And so once you can use the sophistication of data that you have on your audience, put stuff that they care about in directly in front of them, that is the ground war of the streaming wars.
Yeah, okay, but this column does not talk about Disney at all. Disney isn't really mentioned in here.
I can't explain why the author of the writer isn't as smart as me, Steve.
Well, what I'm saying is, I get it. Yeah, I mean, and I doubt the author is as smart as you. I mean, of course, nobody's as smart as I am. But regardless, what I'm saying here is, if this is specifically ESPN centric, I don't know if they're selling the rights in a broad enough fashion to allow Disney to broadcast these type of things on those other properties, Hulu, Disney Plus. They're giving, to me, this column is giving us the impression that this is solely limited to ESPN. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how this is kind of framed. It's not talking about Disney being involved in using Disney properties. It's specifically talking about ESPN properties. So while I agree with like your broad view of it, I don't know if that's really what they're doing here.
I don't know if I just think that, well, I mean, I could obviously easily be wrong, and this person has a lot more context than I do. However, I think they're just reporting on something that's a little bit more narrow in what this says. First of all, any contract with ESPN is a contract with Disney.
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. ESPN, I think, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Disney. You could contract directly with ESPN and not necessarily have the rights to other Disney properties included in the broadcast contract.
This is what I know.
Okay, go ahead.
This is what I know, Steve, as a consumer. So this is consumer awareness.
Okay.
Because I have all these dumb things. I log on to Hulu, and they're serving me access to live ESPN Plus content right there on the homepage. So because it's all the same, whatever the machinations are. What I know right now is if I log on to Hulu's homepage, the first thing I see, now some of it's because of things I've clicked on or whatever, so I understand what what it's serving me. But the first thing it's serving me is all either currently live or upcoming live broadcasts of NBA, NHL, and whatever they've got, ESPN via ESPN Plus through the bundle is servicing me. So and there's some interesting articles about how Netflix is sort of one, and the streaming wars. The key metric is how all these other companies are licensing out their content. That they're sort of given up being the only place you can see these things and knowing that they can just license their stuff out. So this, to me, is vertical integration within that Disney empire that, to me, you can see the paths already. They're already, like, what's ESPN Plus, what's Disney, and what's Hulu through the bundle is becoming, just going between those three services, it's hard to tell that you're changing services.
So you're not saying that Hulu necessarily broadcasts this stuff directly. You're saying that ESPN content is broadcast on Hulu as you can access ESPN through your Hulu account. That's what you're saying.
Yes, it's saying get to Suns Warriors. Click here.
And it's integrated in such a way that it's even hard to tell even what you're looking at.
Exactly.
Because that's not the case for me. In cable TV, I go to ESPN, I watch ESPN. That I agree with. What I thought you were saying is not what you were saying. What I thought you were saying was, like Disney Plus is going to run, the women's gymnastics thing, and that's not what this column says. But you're just saying it's integrated in such a way that it's going to be their no matter what, and everybody knows that, of course. So,
And a 9, 10-year-old girl, or the parents of a 9 or 10-year-old girl, like, oh, Sophia the First is over, you might like, and one of those things is
oh,
the
of course,
upcoming.
yeah. Look,
Yeah,
here's the women's track championship, and look, it's a strong female or whatever, and yeah, I get it. Yeah,
there weren't markets for these things. Any sport that wasn't, and we even had a better definition. Think about when we grew up, Steve, which we won't mention. There were 4 or 5 major sports or whatever, and some sports that like popped, like horse racing or whatever. But everything else was forced onto 3 hours on Saturday afternoon ABC Wide World of Sports, right? Like
yeah.
and that what they've done now from a market perspective is hyper focus these markets, and now they actually have pipelines to feed that content directly into a paying audience, and that means that paying audience doesn't have to be massive.
So for people who are too young to know what we're talking about, Wild World of Sports was a 3-hour show every Saturday on ABC, as Chris said, in which they broadcast all kinds of like minor yet interesting sports. You would see like skiing, and you could see all kinds of stuff like the intro credits. I remember had a skier that went up this crazy ramp or something, went
Yeah,
flying
the
off and
agony of
crashed.
defeat.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, the agony of defeat. And so that's what he's talking about. And it seems to me like I think what you're saying is the entire broadcast of sports is to some extent become a never-ending permanent wide world of sports, in that you can
Yes.
find the Tiddlywinks championship somewhere if you want to find the Tiddlywinks champion. Like ESPN is literally broadcast like cornhole and stuff at times, stuff like that, like literally. And so you can find all that. And so if they're going to have all these platforms, I think here's what it really is. If ESPN is going to have all these platforms, there's a zillion different ESPN. There's like 3 different cable ESPN channels at least on Xfinity: ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN Deportes, and there may be more for all. ESPN, isn't there an ESPN Classic or something too? And then there's the streaming thing, and whatever is going out on Disney. There's ESPN3 and ESPN. So they have to program all these things, and so you're going to need 40 different NCAA sports to literally fill up time and all those, fill up time and space and all those things. And so I think that's what we take away from this. And I like your verticaling. Now that I understand what you're talking about, I like that. One thing that's kind of focused in this column, I'm curious about your opinion on, is like the rise in prominence of women's basketball in particular. And one thing I did not expect, I did note, I don't think we talked about it, but I did note that the ratings for the NCAA women's title game were way, way, way bigger than I thought. Way bigger. Mentions 9.9 million viewers compared to 14.69 with the men's title game, which admittedly wasn't that hot of a game. I did not expect that, and this article is the column on Sports Business Journal is really hyping the fact that women's sports is a part of this.
I think it makes the collectivist approach that the NCAA has taken here, right? You have a couple of these other RANs that start to have viability, mostly through women's sports, women's basketball being the clear number one. But I think volleyball, and I even say gymnastics, and maybe even a little bit track and field, sort of give you, that those things have risen, the audience has grown, and so you can build a little bit more of a robust package. The other thing the article talks about is that, kind of this A-B choice of, is women's NCAA basketball big enough to slice off on its own, and let it go its own way and license that separately, probably for a little bit more money, or do you use it as the high tide lifts all boats for the package, which is obviously what how they got there, we're not quite sure, but that's what happened. That's the contract they signed. So it is interesting. I think the strength of, or probably more importantly, the ways to find audiences for those things made this overall a more attractive package.
I think it's the collective over the individual, because
Yeah.
women's college basketball is not enough to prop up a major contract on its own. The WNBA would have died years ago, but for the NBA propping it up for whatever reason. And women's basketball, like men's college basketball, doesn't do all that great outside of the tournament in terms of ratings and audience and stuff. Women's basketball is going to be a fraction of that. So I think it may be like a key feature of the collective that they're buying here, but I don't think it's big enough on its own. And that may be part of why they're doing that. Because like college football is still on its own, because that's way bigger than all the rest of this combined. So if it was big enough to sell individually, they would have done it. So that's what I think about that. But I like your theory. Um, where the hell is this money coming from? Is Disney just infusing all of this? Because does ESPN really have 115 million more dollars laying around on top of all the hundreds of millions they're already spending annually? Where on earth is the money coming from other than just straight out of Disney investors' pockets? You ever wondered that?
Yes, on all of these things, but but I don't know. It's all at this level of money. It's all funny money and creative financing. Who knows?
Well, especially now that Disney paid the massive dividend of 30 cents a share a while ago. Did you see that?
Yeah.
After all this time, 30 cents a share for a stock that's going at like $90 a share now.
I think they're just, we'll see. They're leveraging for bets. The interesting part, though, is, and this actually goes back, this actually counters my own long tail theory here to a degree. But you can imagine that what Disney's doing, with ESPN specifically, is just making it fat enough to sell, right? Because you get these things in, we got a 10-year contract with the NCAA. We've got these other sports contracts we were about to talk about, so I'll just throw this in now. There's also momentum towards them basically taking over all the NFL media properties. That's Red Zone, that's NFL Network, that's all the programming on NFL Network, that's NFL Films, that's a whole family.
It's NFL Media, which is a subsidiary of the NFL.
So ESPN might also there's a deal for them to take over that. So you could imagine getting all of those fundamentals in place to just fatten the pig to slaughter and then sell it.
Well, I think the big picture that people don't understand is that Disney, which owns ABC and ESPN, is absolutely hemorrhaging money. And there's a stock proxy war going on right now. Guys trying to take over the board of directors. Their Disney movie properties have lost just tons and tons and tons of money. Their parks have gone way downhill. COVID hurt them. But Disney needs cash in the worst way. And ESPN is probably their most successful property. So I've read for a while that ESPN or that Disney may try to sell ESPN just because they need to streamline and they need the money. And so creating a fatter cow to put on the chopping block may be just the way to go in this. And I think what you mentioned before about the NFL is a part of it. I must just transition now to this. The other story here. Why don't you tell them about the other NFL story, Chris?
This is in Pro Football Talk, so your mileage may vary, but
Mike Florio is untrustworthy, so you take it for a grain of salt. But what he's saying here appears to make some sense.
And when you look at where his sources lie, being such a bigwig at NBC now, you would suggest that these kinds of stories he probably has a clearer look into, like what's going on with individual teams.
Yeah, he didn't know a damn thing about football, but this kind of stuff he may have some knowledge about.
Right, he's closer and has better sources. So basically, the deal would be that ESPN would take over the production of and license content and basically take all of that off the NFL's hands. I mean, the NFL, obviously, I don't know how long the NFL Network has been around, 15 years maybe, whatever that. Yeah. So they made a strategic decision to get, to control their own media, to create all these media properties. They must think that's somewhat of a bloat for them. We weren't going to bring this up as a storyline, but they did just offer 200 employees buyout. So they must be doing some kind of restructuring and retooling. You can imagine them saying, why are we covering, having all these media empires to take on the people that already are doing that, where we could probably just license that out, take that off our books, et cetera, et cetera. So you can sort of see some internal machinations within the NFL front office that these sort of play a part of. And, this would you would just ship all of the responsibility for that production and housing over to somebody who wakes up every day thinking about that. The funny thing is their first thought is all of the conflicts of interests here, which are pretty substantial, but already kind of exist. But a move from the NFL front office to ESPN would actually be a layer of separation versus what they have right now, which is completely government state-owned media.
Well, first of all, according to Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is always right, NFL Network was formed on 4 November 2003. So if that is accurate, then they're 21 more than 20 years old.
Oh, but they can drink. Sorry, NFL media.
Okay, but let's get this transaction right here, okay? So this isn't just NFL licensing NFL media over to ESPN. This is in the NFL is going to, if this transaction goes through, and this is just something that's clearly in talks right now, it hasn't closed, but this is the NFL taking an equity stake in ESPN, okay? And so what that means for the uninformed is that the NFL, if this goes through, is going to buy a portion of ESPN. Because remember, I just told you, Disney's trying to make money, and so they need to offload. And I've heard these rumors read these rumors about the NFL about this before. And so this isn't just a licensing agreement where the NFL gives ESPN the right to take over NFL properties. It's the NFL buying a part of ESPN, and in conjunction with, so now they're in bed with ESPN. So I don't know if I agree with the one layer removed thing, because if the NFL owns part of ESPN, it's still the same problem. And so what it really is like offloading NFL media to the professionals a little bit, but they're going to own a part of the professionals, so the same problem still exists.
Yeah, fair. And I think my starting point is it's all there. These even if everything as it stands today, right now, the morning of Saturday before Super Wildcard Weekend, it's already a mishigash. It's already a mess. It's already all kinds of, like we're starting from a place of, we already know that the NFL has its thumb on whatever ESPN does with their NFL coverage as of the contracts that exist right now.
Well, yeah, because we've seen this happen in the past where the NFL is obviously kind of subtly told ESPN to quash certain stories, and I'm not going to repeat them all here. It's no point, but that has happened. And this is only going to make that worse. In NFL, I think NFL Network has done a fairly decent job, not perfect, but a fairly decent job of covering things a little bit more fairly than I would think an in-house media channel would do. Like, the Red Zone Entertainment, which used to be owned by Dan Snyder, would never cover what was then the Washington Redskins in a negative light, because Dan Snyder was a, tiny little terror and all that. NFL Network has been slightly more fair than that, I think. And so, to me, it's kind of a lateral move, but it's certainly not going to make anything better. The NFL will still have their thumb on the screws of ESPN, probably more so now that if this goes through, going to be owned by them. But I do think we can maybe see an improvement of the quality of NFL media, because ESPN is very good at that. And so maybe we'll see better and more interesting content from them.
Yeah, maybe. Although I've actually, over the 21 years that I've been engaging with NFL content, I've actually been usually pleasantly surprised at two things: the quality of it, and that they did do at least a nominal job of having, it feel like somewhat, not completely Pravda. But I agree, that probably does take a production level increase, and I think it makes sense for all involved. One interesting thing to see how they handle. And I think unquestionably the most successful sports broadcast innovation that the NFL Network did was the Red Zone channel. And the Red Zone channel is a key component of upsell to the NFL package through your cable provider. And kind of more importantly and more interesting moving forward is it's a key feature of NFL Sunday Ticket, whether it was DirecTV or YouTube. So, especially when you're in that 4:00 window, sometimes it's the only way to have it to see the games that are blacked out in your market. So if you want to stay on the app, the Red Zone channel at least will jump into, Baltimore, Miami if that's blocked out because your local TV is carrying it. So and blacked out on the direct TV. So I'm curious to see what happens then, because you can imagine a kind of a strange bedfellows if ESPN is producing the red zone, and the red zone is a key feature of YouTube TV's direct TV package. It's one thing when it's the NFL because that's partners 1-to-1. This is a threefold partner.
Believe it or not, I've never seen Red Zone. I've never had it, never watched it, because I'm always watching the Reds.
It's the greatest. It's one of the greatest things they've done in broadcast television in 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been watching the Redskins games, and I think I told you I was not eligible for the NFL package on DirecTV without being a DirecTV subscriber, so I've never had it, and so I've always had to watch Redskin games through either in sports bars or nefarious ways, basically, one of those two things. And so I've never had to go to the red zone, but conceptually, I know you're right, and I know red zone is kind of a key component to the strategy here, especially with the fantasy football set. Because there's
now
a lot of people
too.
out there, who aren't really fans of a particular team. They're fantasy football fanatics, and they would rather watch the red zone to get a better sense of overall what's happening. And they're not necessarily. It's not like even, I don't know, a decade ago, where everybody's pretty much married to their team. That is not what's going on. So the red zone, I think, is catering to that crowd. But I do think it's interesting to see how does it change if ESPN is in charge. Because ESPN, the only broadcast rights ESPN has is what is it, the Sunday night games? No, that's NBC. They have Monday Night Football.
They have Monday Night Football, and then whatever ancillary games come on the special days and playoffs.
Right, and so this is a way for ESPN to get more involved on a Sunday. Because I could see them expanding somehow or changing the red zone coverage a little bit, and them having, because they've got to play the Tiddlywinks championships on Sunday afternoons. Because they don't have the NFL, and so they've got to they compete, and there's generally not that good of stuff that they can compete with.
They don't even try.
I know, that's what I mean. They play the Tiddlywinks championships and stuff, whatever like junk leftover content they have. And so if they are more involved in NFL media, maybe this is a way to better integrate ESPN on a Sunday without them actually getting to broadcast games.
That's a great point. I'm just kind of curious to see how they'll negotiate that partnership. Did they not do it and they just copycat it? Does YouTube just say, well, we can get an NFL VJ who can go from throw up Packers Bears on my left panel, which is what they did, How
about this?
Just as easily, right?
A really wild one. How about just dumping the red zone onto ESPN on Sunday afternoon?
Yeah,
that's not mentioned in here. That's not mentioned in here.
Yeah,
but that
you could imagine Alphabet, which is the corporate owner of YouTube, would lose its mind considering how much they paid for the ticket. But yeah, it'd have to get factored.
And Alphabet is Google, by the way, for those who, Chris is right. Alphabet's the parent of Google, which is the parent which owns YouTube. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's ESPN's play here. Maybe because that would put them in a better position of every network. I mean, Red Zone, I don't know what the ratings are for Red Zone, but I would think it's got significant ratings. And I think
it's
huge, right?
You would have an NFL revolt if a red zone or a red zone capability went away.
Yeah. And red zone, if it was done right, you could maybe even beat the ratings for some of these NFL games. Not the major ones like Cowboys, Patriots or something like that, but for like lesser games like the Washingtons versus the Cardinals of the world, red zone might beat the ratings if it was accessible on ESPN.
It's the greatest thing It's the greatest thing for the 4:00 window because especially now with the fanning games out all over the week. It's where you have the least amount. Right? There's only sometimes there's as little as 3 to 4 games in that 4:00 window. So you're actually not missing much. And like I said, if you're on your app, you can't actually watch what game is broadcast in your local market. But with only 3 or 4 games, you actually basically do watch it through the app, and you're watching all those things. And which is interesting because all the TV people will tell you that the most valuable real estate for NFL football is actually not prime time. It's actually the 4 o'clock window. So those things,
That's
it
why
does
they
bring those things
focus the
head to
bigger
head.
games. Why they on the
Yeah.
4 o'clock window.
So what I think you'll probably see, we talk all the time about how they're just rebuilding cable. I think in that scenario, what eventually happens is YouTube TV, which is basically their cable replacement package, and basically works very similar to cable. They'll just negotiate with ESPN. They're already carrying those ESPN channels, and they'll just negotiate. You heard it here first. A carriage fee that would include ESPN's, just like it works right now with your local cable, and YouTube TV and ESPN would negotiate an amount for all those things, and then probably on the YouTube TV standpoint, then they're just going to upsell you to the NFL Network, upsell you to the package, upsell you to the Red Zone through its carriage deal with ESPN.
We said for years on this show that cable TV isn't so much dying as it's turning into streaming.
Yeah, we're just going to stream cable, right? So we're talking about hardware, not concepts.
Like right now today, there is a cable for every TV in my house but one. There's a cable running from the wall to the television for me because I'm a Xfinity subscriber. The room I'm sitting in does not have a cable port in it, so it is streaming Xfinity online services to this TV, and it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. And the future is what you're saying. It's you subscribe to Hulu or YouTube. Let's use YouTube TV. YouTube TV is going to have carriage fee license agreements with all these other channels, so you can just go to YouTube TV and then dial up ABC or ESPN or the History Channel, whatever it is you want, will be there. It's not quite there yet, but that's where we're heading. And where we're heading is like that's what Xfinity's going to and Comcast are going to become, or not, or Time Warner. Those are going to become that. That's what it is. Let me ask you this: with this NFL ESPN takeover, or merger, not quite a merger, but ESPN taking over, NFL taking over part of ESPN, blah. Are you worried about the objectivity of the analysis and journalism that surrounds football?
Yes, but I also feel like that's akin to being buried to your neck in the sand and the tide rising a little bit past your nose and going, well, what's going on here? So like I just don't know. Like I think it's a matter of degrees. Is this some kind of Rubicon line here? I don't know, but I think to me we're just moving the Rubicon line on this topic all the time. So it's kind of hard to know. I think it's troubling 100%. Do I think I think it they want to control, no few entities in the globe want to control the message like the NFL. So anything that gives them more access to controlling the message, they're pro.
Well, I think to a certain extent, sports media isn't real media in the first place. Like analysis of the economy and politics and the election and I don't know, abortion rights coverage. Those are serious topics that even though we don't get it, is best with objective, independent analysis on whatever side you're on or whatever you're trying to see. Sports is not that important, okay? Sports is entertainment. And so I think the critical nature of the objectivity in quote real news is not really the same as football, because how important is it that yes, we want to have an objective look. Don't get me wrong, but if the coverage is a bit more slanted to the Cowboys, is society going to crumble because of it? So I don't know. I mean, I am worried about it, but I also don't think it's in the world of problems. This isn't a real problem. It's not that important. So I'm not as bothered. What I'm saying is I'm not as bothered by this as I would be if it was a merger of something that would affect analysis of real news.
Fair. Yeah, and that's a strong point. I think where I find it the most troublesome is in the hyper consolidation, and we're just going to see more consolidation, not less, in media over the coming years. I mean, I think my prediction was the merger of I can't Paramount and Warner Discovery.
Yeah.
So you're going to see more of that, not less. And so I think it's less about the field of sports and it's more about the corporate entities, and the money flows. And so if there's a complete lack of objectivity and then there's this much money changing hands, that's where it does become somewhat problematic. So it's like when you zoom out and look at the players, that's what worries me more than, are we getting, more Cowboys games on TV than we should, or, so on and so forth.
Well, but the other part of it that concerns me more is when there's legitimate issues, involved in we've talked a lot on this show about how the NFL is more in bed now with gambling than they ever have been. DraftKings is a sponsor and all that. Corruption at that level is important and is legitimate news. And if the principal outlet covering the NFL is owned by the NFL in whole or in part, ESPN, I think it's a lot easier for the NFL to put the kibosh on the analysis of an actually important story like that, or discrimination. I'm making stuff up, but like discrimination by the NFL against pick your group, or anything, or like the Dan Snyder stuff. If they wanted to protect Dan Snyder, it would have been a lot easier to do so if they had their finger on the pulse of ESPN, and so. I'm not someone, I don't really, like I said, I mean, whether they're covering the Cowboys objectively or whatever is, at the end of the day, just entertainment, not that important. But those other stories are important. And I do think it makes it more difficult for them to cover those real important things fairly.
Yeah, I think we're saying that the same thing. I was actually going to bring up the gambling one as a good example of where this starts to get murky.
Yeah, exactly, and because that's legitimate. If it could go down a road, I mean, Vegas was started by mobsters. That's who controlled Vegas for years, like literally the mob, and those are the modern version, the extension of what started Vegas is what now the NFL is getting in bed with. And so you want that to be covered fairly because that is a legitimate societal story. So that's what would concern me about it more so than, the on the field stuff, which is utterly unimportant.
Yeah. So as we continue down the positives and negatives of the distributed megacorp long tail, we got some, Pat McAfee provides such a petri dish on so many things on the regular, and I'm not just talking about his tank tops, but he gave us another one over these last couple of weeks with his buddy Aaron Rodgers, where you start to see where all of these connections and all of this kind of large corporate background and connections start to play out in some pretty interesting ways. I'm sure all of you listening know about this, Pat McAfee and Jimmy Kimmel and Aaron Rodgers and Norby Williams. And basically, Aaron Rodgers says some things. He says some things about Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel reacts. That's all fine, right? People can say whatever they want. The interesting part is they all work for the same people, right? Like this is all, like it's one thing, they all theoretically could walk down the hall and talk to each other, not literally, but you know what I mean? We don't generally see intercorporate, battles play out on these different platforms. And that's just the reality when the game board is this big.
Yeah. And just to explain for those of you living under a rock, Aaron Rodgers openly insinuated that Kimmel was a Jeffrey Epstein. What's that pleasure? What was that island called? He was insinuating that Kimmel was involved in the Epstein shenanigans, and Kimmel took exception to that, and so that's what that was. But so Aaron Rodgers has been a regular on Pat McAfee, and he said all that on Pat McAfee's show. But the big picture paid regular, right? And so McAfee, by extension, owns a part of the controversy because he's paying Rodgers to say outlandish things, which is why he's a guest. Okay, so the big picture here, though, is Pat McAfee's show is contracted to ESPN now. It's not an ESPN created thing, in-house thing. It's they bought this property and they broadcast it's a contract thing on here, and that is distinctly different from what ESPN has always been. ESPN has produced almost all of their stuff in house. They brought Barstool on for a while, for like 10 days or something, and then dumped them. And now Barstool was the same as McAfee in that they were a contracted broadcast thing. And like 5 minutes later, they said some things that ESPN didn't like, and they were gone. Now the difference here, by the way, you can read about this. The story we saw this in is out of Variety, believe it or not. Pat McAfee shatters old TV rules and shows how much ESPN's game is changing by Brian Steinberg, dated the 11th of January. And so the big picture point here is they're saying is that the kind of shtick that Pat McAfee does, which is outlandish, attention-grabbing headlines, is different than what ESPN used to do, and it's highlighted by Aaron Rodgers, Norby Williamson, all this stuff that's happened. So is it showing ESPN is desperate to be relevant? Yeah, maybe, because ESPN's in-house content's really sucked for a long time. And it got not partisan, but they started delving into social issues and stuff, and it alienated a lot of folks, people on my side of the aisle. And so this is kind of their attempt to kind of back away from that, I think.
But then they didn't in the end, I think, is the end result.
They might have made
right?
a mistake, but what I'm saying is this was maybe their attempt, and they bought the guy who's more outlandish than what they wanted, you know?
Yeah, or sort of just a controversy controller, and then they have no controversy, chaos agent, and that they have less control over. Because what the article does is actually show like a pretty, kind of cross ideological like span of these people who were kind of shown the door and the change in leadership, yada yada. But like, this isn't in house. To Steve's point, this is contracted. Although the other thing the article says in an interesting way is that it also might signal a little bit that Pat McAfee knows he needs to play ball somewhat to keep this sweetheart deal, right? Because
he did kick Aaron Rodgers off the show.
Right. For, with not definition on whether it's ever or how long or whatever, but for the rest of this quote unquote football season, I think was,
right.
Which is, 6 weeks. So, I think you saw both sides give a little, probably realizing that, wrecking a deal, what is it, 5 months in, is probably bad for all involved, is generally a solid statement. So I think everybody backed off the cliff.
McAfee could just take the show and go to a million other platforms too and do the same business. He doesn't really need ESPN.
But he must feel like he needs them some.
Well, he needs their money. He's making a lot of money. Yeah. That's what it is.
But we've seen him walk away. How many times can you walk away from this kind of money? Because we saw him do it with FanDuel. There's only so many times that, Pat McAfee's not, he's not the richest guy in the world, right? Like, how many times can you walk away from big paydays?
Yeah. But at the end of the day, he's going to have a platform for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's more lucrative here.
Have you ever seen this? I've never watched it. I mean, I have stuff to do during the day.
Just clips that, in terms of like having to engage with this nonsense. I don't find, like, even aesthetically, I don't want someone like hopping up on their heels in front of a desk. And I just not what I'm even like, I don't care. It almost doesn't even matter what's coming out of anyone's mouth. It just doesn't appeal to me.
You just don't like to see this kind of,
It's just, I don't know. And also just like, call me old school, but I think a little bit of production value. I don't feel like everything I turn on television or engage with is something that I could just as easily gone to YouTube. I don't know. Wow, I'm really showing some age, but you know what I mean? Like, I like a little bit of production value. I like creative people thinking about creative ways to put something on, not just like, hitting camera on and seeing yahoos say nonsense.
Well, because it didn't. McAfee started as like just an independent YouTuber type. I think that's where he started this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And
that's basically what he told him. If you want me, you just let me do everything, and you hit record and broadcast, and I'll take care of the rest.
Well, yeah, and I think it shows the desperation of ESPN to a certain extent to allow that to happen. Because my point is, they never did that kind of thing before. They booted this Friday article talks about they booted Barstool in like days. Because Barstool, you should have known what Barstool is. I'm not a huge Barstool fan. It's It's sticky. It's shock. It's I mean, it's Dave Portnoy, and that's who he is. And ESPN was stupid if they didn't know what they were bringing in. But McAfee fits into the Barstool kind of methodology perfectly. He is that same exact thing. And now ESPN is not only bringing him in, but they're letting him do his thing. Except, like we said, they clamped down on him somewhat, I guess. They did boot Aaron Rodgers off for insult. I'm all in favor. I hate Jimmy Kimmel. I'm all in favor of insulting Jimmy Kimmel, but don't lie about it. And Aaron Rodgers is making up nonsense, and so they did clamp down on him. But I don't know how. I think it's ESPN showing desperation because they've collapsed their empire in a lot of ways.
I just think it's stupid from Mac. I think he realized how wrong it was. I don't care what anyone thinks about Jimmy Kimmel. We all think about the one time that many of us somewhat defended Dan Snyder over the last 15 years. It was when he was falsely accused of being associated with Epstein. Yeah. That was the one time all of us, unzipped the hazmat suit a little bit and said, that seems a little...
Well, there's no evidence of it, and there's no evidence. Right. I don't like Kimmel at all, but there's no evidence that Kimmel has been involved in Epstein. And I don't know, like, even if McAfee didn't know that Aaron Rodgers was going to say this, McAfee could have pushed back on him, going, hold on a minute, you've never seen, that's not legit. Right. He could have said that, and he didn't. He just let Rodgers kept talking,
And I also think there's just that. Like, what are you doing? Like that's just as dumb. And you're going to open yourself up to, a legal response. No one wants, hysterically the next couple days later gets, it was just all very, very stupid. But let's say it was Jimmy Fallon, different corporate entity. I think ESPN is like, this is what we signed up for, right? The problem really wasn't the controversy. Ultimately, the problem is that it was in-house. The problem, if this had been Jimmy Fallon, it would have still been like the same kind of kerfluffle and all that. But I don't, but ESPN, I think Aaron Rodgers shows up the following Wednesday or whatever. I think it's because we can't have these kind of battles happening within the empire.
But guys like Fallon would never allow that to happen, though. Even if somebody spouted off something crazy, Fallon would have gone, whoa, and made a joke of it or something and kind of made it known that, this is stupid in one way or another, where McAfee didn't at all. McAfee didn't play into it, but he just let it go. Fallon would never do that.
No, I'm saying if Fallon had been the target.
Oh, the target. Oh, yeah. Oh,
okay. Just swapping out a different corporate-owned late night host. So if Rodgers had picked a fight with Fallon, ESPN is like, well, this is what we signed up for, and probably just keeps it moving.
But you're saying because it's in-house, it's a bigger problem.
Yeah,
maybe so.
And then because now it draws in the executives, and now it's like some boardroom like, what the can you guys not control these guys? We're not paying for them to pick fights within the farm.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Jimmy Fallon's a huge hypocrite of his own, but that's another story for another day. Part of the reason why I don't like him. But yeah, no, that's certainly. I mean, don't beat up on. Let's not beat up on the neighbors. Don't beat up on family. If you're going to beat somebody up, go do the, someone on the other team.
Yeah. So, super fascinating. I predict, if a mini prediction here is, Aaron, by the time the 2024 NFL season starts to heat up sometime in late summer, early fall, Aaron Rodgers will be back on a weekly.
Of course he will. Aaron Rodgers is a loose cannon and a weirdo. I mean, he's, he talked about like doing ayahuasca and it's like, whatever country
that was the coolest thing about him.
No, it was not, Chris. I'm sorry to say, but he's like to some level or another kind of estranged from some of his family and stuff. I mean, I don't know the details of all that, but my point is, Aaron Rodgers is not normal, and he's a total.
He's a prickly pear.
Yeah, he's a weirdo, and so he's good in that respect because you never know what he's going to say. And to be honest, I mean, McAfee may have been told to temporarily shut it down, but he loves it. If you give him truth serum, he loves it. It's more attention to this show than he had before. It falls into the any news is better than no news category. Yeah,
the boardroom just wishes they were smart enough not to. pick
pick your other
targets.
Pick your other ultra liberal host you want to beat up on, Aaron. You don't pick the ABC guy because you have a point. If he had said that about Fallon or, who's that idiot on CBS, Stephen Colbert. I mean, somebody like that, it might have made the news, but it might not have been quite the story. So I agree with you there.
No way. It never. No, 100%. But it's been not a great week for McAfee's paid guests. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers got himself in this. We just talked about it, and then Nick Saban retired. I wonder if so his two big paid guests that helped put him on the map. Been a rough week.
He can have Saban on every week still.
Yeah, he can, but a year or two later, it's going to.
No, I think. Well, Saban is a pretty boring guy. I mean, Saban is like the Bill Belichick of college sports. He's not a great guest. It's just you had him on there, and it was interesting because he was
in the mix every week.
Yeah, and Alabama's the media darling and all of that. So so it's less about Saban the personality and more about who Saban is. So in that regard, thinking through it live on the air here, yeah, you're right. I mean, Saban becomes less relevant because he's less interesting. He's not that interesting a guy, and so when he's not in the middle of things, it's not big news anymore.
Unless he doesn't want another job, which he's made all the money, so doesn't have to work, and maybe he truly doesn't want to do that, and he just has no F's to give, and he just starts to open up. Now then you would pay him.
Yeah, but I mean, we don't know if that's true or not true, though.
No, but that would be the only way he becomes interesting 12 months from now.
Yeah. Now, I mean, in terms of Saban, I mean, I don't know what his future is because he's got to be. Do you know how old he is off the top of your head?
I mean, he's got to be in his 70s, right?
That's what I was kind of thinking is 70s. I'm going to look it up here real fast.
Not a good week for old football coaches.
Yeah, I mean, because Bill Belichick. Okay, Saban was born in 1951, and so that is 70 October. So he's 74. So yeah, I mean. He's got all the money, as you said, so he could do nothing and be perfectly happy. But does he want to be a commentator or something? I don't think he'd be a very good one, personally. But, I don't know. I thought it was kind of odd that he just retired kind of out of the blue, though. Like one day he was there and next day he's gone and nobody knew about it.
Yeah, no, it was a surprise. But, and some of the post reporting has been, something we've been talking about for a long time, NIL, portal, expanded eligibility. Oh, I'm going rogue here, but one little minor kind of DMV related story, if you're a DMV local, is I am really curious to see what the NCAA does with Talia Tuivasa-Vailoanga. Because do you see how he's applying for a 6th year of eligibility, claiming that So he's put his desire to enter in the portal. He also has petitioned the NCAA for a 6th year of eligibility. Now that some of that's COVID and redshirting, but he's claiming that because he did a couple token appearances in a game and in his first or second, I think it's actually his 2nd year, that shouldn't count. So, and he's being very explicit that he's basically not ready to be drafted based on his resume at Maryland, which he retires, I think, is technically their best quarterback. But he needs another year to cook. So he's entered the transfer portal. He's petitioned to have that. Think about this, Steve. If they grant some BS extension for Talia Tuivasa-Vailoanga around, you suited up twice in, year 2, that doesn't really count. You get another redshirt year. And you got players going on 5 and 6 years of eligibility who have gone through the transfer portal once or twice. They also said that if he can go to the transfer portal, he probably looks to bank 1.5 to 2 million, which is like bridge money. You're getting paid $2 million to continue to try to up your ability to get drafted. It's really fascinating. This is something to watch. If the NCAA gives Talia Tuivasa-Vailoanga his year of eligibility left, you get almost the opposite. You get the kind of one and done feature of basketball, or like the 2 and done in football of jumping to the pros. Now you have a world where actually extending your eligibility, banking, and then maybe improving your ability to get drafted is the route for many players.
There's no way the NCAA can agree to that. Surely there's no way that can possibly happen. And that's truly the fall of Roman Empire. If in terms of NCAA as amateur sports, if they're allowing this to happen. NCAA has already ruined themselves as it is.
Just watch it. That's one. That's a really kind of an interesting case. I'm sure and they're gonna have to make a judgment on it sooner than later, considering the portal windows and all that stuff. It can't just linger. So, and Saban did cite some of the post reporting has been like just this new world order. He just at 74, as you say, didn't have the appetite to go, full hog in what he knew he'd have to do.
Well, because it's another level of he's got to do. Because I don't think he's necessarily the world's greatest coach in terms of X's and O's tactician on the field. Where he's great is building teams. He was great at recruiting these people, and once they're there, and he just kept recruiting them, and he played the best ones. He had guys on that team who were quality A-level starters on other teams that didn't start at Alabama because he's so good at. But when you throw the transfer portal and NIL in there, that means that he's got to have a whole nother thing to keep track of and do. And obviously, he didn't want to, and I don't blame him.
Yeah, you have to basically create an internal recruiting department, internal to your team. You have to recruit your players back every year.
It just nobody be under the. I'm going to finish with this because aren't we out of time? I think we're almost out of time here. Everybody should accept the fact that NCAA football is no longer amateur sports. It is a professional sports network. It's not a network. It's a professional sports organization now, and the fundamental nature of amateur sports, I think, is gone forever, and I don't like that.
Well, if you want another brick in the wall on that one, watch the Talia Tuivasa-Ilunga decision here, probably coming up in the next couple of weeks. And you could definitely make the argument that there is nowhere an athlete, at least in the United States, has unlimited free agency like men's college football.
Yeah. So we'll probably do a story on that once the decision comes out. I'm glad you mentioned it. So there's a preview of something to come.
If you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes, if you could give us a follow, click that follow button, and leave us a rating and a review, that would be amazing. You can find us on all of your podcasting platforms. You can also find us on the Hogsty Network homepage. You can find us on the Hogsty YouTube page. And you can actually go directly to the show link and listen right from that URL, which you can find on the Hogsty homepage. And follow us on Twitter. It's Just Business Pod. Starting to get a little bit of engagement there. So you can find us there, and we usually tweet out shows, tweet out stories that are interesting, et cetera, et cetera. Steve, it's not a boring time in the world of the Hogsty, I'm sure.
No. The crappy season is over, but the more interesting part has begun. Washington has now reportedly hired Peters from the 49ers. What's his name? Adam Peters, I think. Peters to be the new GM. So things are heating up. We're going to cover that on the Hogside podcast, which is released every Thursday morning, and we have all of our regular written content.
Awesome. So there you go. So, and not boring in Washington land, and we will see you in 2 weeks.